Hello everyone, and welcome to Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we explore Dante's Inferno and how to understand hell. Dante's three-part epic poem, The Divine Comedy, or Commedia, is one of the most influential and dense works of poetic literature in the Western tradition. Building off Homer and Virgil and influencing the likes of Chaucer, Milton, Blake, and Tennyson, as well as bringing to popular consciousness and form the modern Italian language, Dante's epic delves into the meaning of allegory, poetry, love, truth, philosophy, and theology. Dante's poetry rests on the classical presumptions of the human being. Earthly love does have divine or transcendent character and quality, and there is a moral order and natural order to the universe. Moreover, following from the Christian tradition, which Dante is of course part of and extols, it is first the love of things temporal, when finally and properly ordered, allows one to enjoy earthly loves, while proceeding to move toward the permanent things, the good, the true, and the beautiful. The Divine Comedy is a rich and dense text. It expects a command of the classics, which would have been commonplace in the early Renaissance period when Dante was writing. The stories of Homer and Virgil, the Greek philosophical tradition, and of course Christian philosophy and theology are all inculcated in the Divine Comedy. It is for this reason that it is often hard for people to approach the Divine Comedy without any basis and understanding of the Greek and Latin classics, of Greek philosophy, and of Christian philosophy and theology. Without some knowledge of these traditions, Dante usually goes right over the heads of people. The Divine Comedy also delves into the heart of Christian, specifically Catholic philosophy, in how hell is constructed, the role of love in salvation, and how miserableness, a life overwhelmed in and by sin, is transcended to a life of happiness, which is what salvation is all about in Christianity. To enter heaven is not to be in clouds playing a harp. It is to enter the realm of unending joy, unending happiness in the beatific vision. Admittedly, the poem is exceedingly dense and ripe with all types of layers of allegory, philosophy, and theology. For a basic understanding of the intellectual content of the poem, I cannot go too deep into the themes for risk of losing you, the reader or listener. As such, I will explore a few of the major themes in the Inferno and give an explanation and context to them to help better understand the nature of the layers of hell in the Inferno. To understand Dante's construction of hell, we must first understand some basic things about Christian theology. In Christian theology, God is understood as love and truth. Anyone who says differently or crudely says something, as the new atheists do, that God is like a flying spaghetti monster, is clearly illiterate in theological content and education. God is understood as love and truth. This is important to know when exploring and understanding the 9 circles of hell, because hell is the inverted relationship to God. Therefore, we find love and truth misdirected through hell, inverted and ultimately separated from the realities of divine love and truth, which bring about the fulfillment of the human life. Furthermore, Christian anthropology asserts that man has a telos, and that this telos is to live a life in union with truth, wisdom, and love. Without knowing truth, which is impossible without reason or wisdom, then one cannot properly love. Truth, reason, and love are intimately bound together in their own version of the Trinity. And in fact, the Christian theological tradition, going back to the early church fathers and codified in Catholic doctrine, asserts that truth is God the Father, reason or wisdom, the Logos, is Jesus Christ, and love is the Holy Spirit. Without this, one cannot live a truly fulfilled and happy life, which is what the telos in all humans seek. As Dante and Virgil approach the gates of hell, they see the now infamous words, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." The reason why there is no hope in hell is because hell is timeless, just like how heaven is timeless. We should ignore the usage of rising and setting suns in the poem. It is not that Dante is making a mistake. He uses the time of day and night in his narrative as a device to communicate a message to the reader. It is a form of poetic communication. Time, however, does exist for Dante, because Dante is not actually dead. And if you read the Divine Comedy carefully, the skin complexion, the color complexion of Dante changes as he goes through hell. When Dante and Virgil enter hell, they meet the first group of people, known as the neutrals. The neutrals are people who did not side with good or evil in their lives or time of crisis, which demands action. As such, neither heaven nor hell, properly speaking, can take them, because they didn't choose the good, the true, and the beautiful, which is heaven, nor did they specifically choose any sort of privation of the good, true, or beautiful, which would be hell. Here, they are stung by bees and other insects that cause them to run and scatter about. Get it? There's a form of movement by being stung. They are forced to move into action, which they failed to do in life. Thus, in hell, so to speak, or in the realm of the neutrals, all the neutral souls are constantly in movement, the exact opposite of what they did in their lives on earth. Although there are 9 circles to hell, there are, in practicality, only 8 circles. The first circle of hell is Limbo, which Dante and Virgil reach after crossing the river Acheron, the mythical Greek river that led one to the underworld, but no one is being punished in Limbo. Limbo is where all the righteous pagans are located. These souls, including some notable Islamic philosophers, are those people who, though not Christian, e.g. not having been baptized, had achieved the cardinal or natural virtues in life. At the same time, they did know God, which is to say, they did live in some standard of truth, who again is God. They are not punished, nor are they rewarded. Limbo is denied the beatific vision and true joy, but the light of Limbo is the light of the human intellect, from the many noble and intelligent souls that find themselves in this circle. Furthermore, as Virgil describes, when Jesus descended into hell, in Christian tradition known as the harrowing of hell, he brought out of hell the Jewish patriarchs and other Old Testament saints, prophets, and heroes, and ushered them as the first fruit of heaven. Many of the souls in Limbo include famous Greek and Roman poets, philosophers, and literary and historical figures. Here we find Julius Caesar, Aeneas, Ovid, Lucan, Electra, Homer, Hesiod, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Seneca, and again also certain Muslim philosophers, Averroes, Avicenna, and Saladin. These are people who were either intellectually brilliant and sought to live a life in accord with truth, the truth as best known to them, but not knowing the full truth of Christian revelation, and in doing so were able to master the cardinal virtues in life. The cardinal virtues are not enough to bring about eternal joy, which is why these souls are ultimately denied the eternal joy of the beatific vision. But having directed their loves to wrong things, or not having directed their loves to wrong things, or not having denied any basic truths, they are ultimately left unpunished. Life in Limbo is also social. It has vegetation and light. It is very much like life on earth. It is good, but not perfect. There are moments of happiness, but the happiness in Limbo is not enduring, just like how the happiness on earth is often fleeting. Limbo is envisioned like Elysium from Roman mythology. I also want to draw our attention to the nature of Limbo more specifically because it serves as a good contrast to the other circles of hell. It has light and vegetation. The souls here are conversing with each other in peace without violence. Dante describes Limbo as a great city with shining light and high walls that remind us of Troy or Rome, a splendid castle and sweetly flowing waters. As he ends Canto 4, he remarks, "I come into a place where no light is." The transformation of light to darkness is an allegory of knowledge. Light equals knowledge, and darkness equals the lack of knowledge, and it is also a major allegorical motif throughout the Bible. The Apostle Paul, for instance, in the New Testament, associates light with knowledge and darkness with lack of knowledge or sin. Again, Limbo has some light because those who are in it possess the knowledge of the cardinal virtues and the natural law, though they did not know the supernatural light of revelation. Lastly, as Dante is entering hell, his face changes complexion to symbolize his movement from light and life to darkness and death. His face grows paler as he descends through the circles of hell. The relating of the circles of hell to differing environments and city political descriptions is one of the levels of allegories that run throughout the Divine Comedy. But we aren't going to focus too much on that aspect. Now, having finished Limbo, we can move into the proper circles of hell. Moving beyond Limbo, we enter the second circle of hell, where people are finally being punished for their sins, and the place where there is no more light. It is important to know that in the Christian tradition, and by Christian here I am referring to Catholic, that sin is misdirected love, which corresponds with having lived by standards of falseness or untruth. It is not so much that people are being punished per se, but it follows from the Christian anthropological insight of becoming what you love. What you chose to love on earth is what you become in hell. What you desired in life is what you are granted. Thus, it is not punishment per se, but that you are literally becoming that which you sought on earth. By living a life of falsity, humans will be miserable and not live contented and happy lives, again, because happiness is associated with living in accord with the truth. That is, by living by standards of falseness, e.g., man becoming the measure of all things, of right and wrong, woe unto those who call good evil and evil good, man can fulfill his desires. But that, again, is to invert the natural law and the divine order of things. That is ultimately what all the circles of hell entail. And as it relates specifically to the second through fifth circles, the sinners in these circles directed their loves to things that could not ultimately satisfy the human heart and intellect. These souls do not suffer the worst punishments, which reside inside the walls of the city of Dis, for at least they loved or lusted after something. They ultimately loved things, however, that cannot be satiated, because they misidentified the objects of their love as the summit of love itself. If you love carnal things, and all carnal things dissipate and wither away, ultimately the happiness that you seek withers away with it. We find in these circles, the second circle, lust, the third circle, gluttony, the fourth circle, mammon, the fifth circle, conflict and wrath. The second circle contains all the lustful souls who lusted after and over persons. Dante is very much the Augustinian. Those who are familiar with Augustine will see Augustinian themes and tropes employed all throughout Dante's poem. The lustful souls were in love with the idea of love, to quote Augustine from the Confessions. That is, they chased after love, but never knew love, e.g., they did not know or love God, and therefore the love they sought in earthly things could never be fully satisfied. Rather than loving another human through God, which is the proper order of love according to Christianity, the love of human beings because in the human being you find God, these souls who sought to love simply the human being apart from God caused great ill to themselves and to others through their lustful pursuits of others. They were, in effect, otherizing or objectifying other images of God instead of seeing them as images of God and loving the image by loving God. The second circle, where these souls are whipped around in an uncontrollable whirlwind, also represents how lustful desires take control of a soul and how the soul, the rational intellect in the human being, cannot have any sort of tranquility or peace once lust takes control of one's life. Just as human love, which is not the same as divine love, cannot satisfy the desires of souls, the souls being whipped about in the windstorms are controlled by their pure desires, represented by the winds, which they have no ability to control. The message is simple. Your soul has been taken captive by desire, and you are now enslaved to your lustful passions. Rather than the soul ordering desire to the proper objects of love, your desire enslaved your soul, and desire ran amok. The two most famous individuals, or at least the most famous episode in the second circle of hell, is when Dante encounters Francesca and Paolo. It is important here to note Dante's conversation with Francesca. Francesca does not blame herself. She blames others for her sin. And that is going to become a common motif in hell. All the souls in hell ultimately cannot accept that they were responsible for their sins and seek to blame others. The third circle contains the gluttonous souls who deformed their natures through their own gluttony. In this circle, Dante is unable to make out the souls because of their deformed natures. Furthermore, gluttonous souls cannot enjoy their true nature, or the true nature of the world, beauty, light, and tranquility, which is represented by the fact that there is constant darkness, rain, and lack of light, which distorts them and makes them unrecognizable. Just as in the second circle, we saw the sin of trying to love a carnal person for satisfaction, in the third circle, we find the gluttonous souls being guilty of trying to have found happiness in food and other natural pleasures on earth. Moving onto the fourth circle, we meet the souls who loved greed. Mammon has long been considered the root of all evil, for it represents the debasement of the soul away from transcendent things, only to material things, since money is, in fact, a purely material good. Dante describes Plutus, the mythical god of wealth in the Greek tradition, as mankind's arch enemy. When we enter the fourth circle, the canto opens with gibberish speech. This will become a growing theme as Dante and Virgil descend deeper into hell, where truth does not exist, and speech becomes slurred and harder to understand as a result of this lack of truth. It is also an inversion of the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis 1, where God speaks the world into existence, therefore bringing about knowledge and understanding. The souls are condemned to carry heavy stones in the fourth circle, representing how one's great prize in earthly life, the power of wealth, becomes a burden in the afterlife. What was thought as one's great possession, an instrument of earthly liberation and power, ultimately enslaves the soul. hence why the souls here are enslaved by their love of wealth and weighed by stones that correspond with their relative wealth on earth. They enslave themselves during their earthly lives. Rather than use their wealth for good, charity, and collective improvement, these souls also hoarded their wealth for themselves and were entirely self-absorbed. The meaning of this circle is straightforward. Wealth cannot provide meaning in your life, no matter how hard you try. This can be abstracted further to argue that material goods can never satisfy one's desires. You always chase after more things, just as these souls sought after more and more goods. The pursuit of wealth for the sake of wealth destroys the world, communities, and ultimately man himself. As Dante and Virgil sail over the river Styx to the city of Dis, they sail upon the fifth circle of hell, where all souls who loved wrath and conflict are found. The souls here are locked in eternal struggle with other souls as reflective of what they loved. Again, what you loved in life corresponds with what your soul will be doing in hell. In hell, you are granted precisely what you desired on earth. Thus again, it is not punishment per se. Because these souls thrived and lusted after conflict and wrath in life on earth, they receive what they desired in hell. Flagius, Flagius, this time you shout in vain. Throughout the journey, Dante includes Greek and Roman heroes and gods. For those who don't know, Flagius was a god of wrath and war who, in rage, destroyed Apollo's temple. And Apollo is the god of reason and truth. Do you see the symbolism there? Hence why he is present, Flagius, as the guardian of this circle of hell. The notable soul that Dante meets here is a fellow Florentine and wrathful partisan named Filippo Argenti, who lived a life of conflict and vengeance while alive and is forever cast down into hell to live out an eternal life of conflict and wrath. Whereas the lustful loved objects for sexual gratification, the gluttonous loved objects that ultimately deformed their nature, and the money chasers sought after material goods to try and satisfy them, the souls in the fifth circle sought strife to find meaning in their lives, hence why they are cast into the river Styx, where perpetual conflict and wrath is found. In the Catholic tradition, God does not condemn anyone who has not already chosen it for themselves on account of free will. A soul becomes what it loves, as already mentioned. So hell simply corresponds with what one loved in life. And since the soul becomes that in life, and since the soul is immortal, it must go to the state of what it loved in the afterlife. By loving the things themselves rather than being able to see God through the things these sinners loved, they slowly drifted away from truth. Like Flagius, they destroyed Apollo's temple of reason and truth and became controlled by wrath and strife alone. Something to take note of in Dante's journey is that in his conversations, the people, again, he converses with never take responsibility for their actions. As mentioned, we saw this already with Francesca in the second circle of hell, and now we see it more and more as Dante begins more and more conversations with those he meets throughout hell. Entering the latter half of hell, we transition from sins which were marred by misdirected love, lust, gluttony, the pursuit of mammon, the love of wealth, and of wrath itself, to those who outright rejected and denied truth. Heresy is the first layer within the walls of the city of Dis, And heresy here is not simply Christian heresy, but heresy to truth itself, which would be an affront to God, since God is truth in Christianity. The circles of hell to be found within the walls of the city of Dis are heresy, the willful rejection of truth. The seventh circle, violence done unto others, self, and God, or more specifically, violence done unto nature. The eighth circle is fraud and non-malevolent betrayal. The ninth circle, intentional betrayal and treachery. The most notable figure that is found in the circle of hell is Epicurus. Whereas other great Greek luminaries and philosophers were in limbo, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Thales, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Heraclitus, Zeno. We also found Roman philosophers like Cicero and Seneca. The inclusion of Epicurus in this circle of hell is because Epicurus rejected two basic truths that all of his other Greek philosophers tried to live by. Truth, that there is truth with the capital T, and the immortality of the soul. Thus, the philosophers we found in limbo knew some sort of truth which allowed them to live a life according to the cardinal virtues. Epicurus was one of the first epistemological relativists, or perhaps we might say epistemological nihilists, in charging that there was no standard of truth to seek to live by, and therefore ultimately also denying the immortality of the soul. Instead, Epicurus argued, one should just live a life of hedonistic pleasure, because humans are just material bodies. And if you see how Dante constructs hell, if you accept Epicurus's philosophical idea, you are automatically in the second circle of hell, lust. Epicurus, as mentioned, denies truth and the immortality of the soul in a way that the souls in the circles preceding the circle of heresy never did. Those who sought to live a life of lust, lusting after human beings, never denied the immortality of the soul or that there was a divine order to nature, truth with the capital T. I want to point out here one of the great moments of literary irony in the Inferno. The Epicureans, in denying the immortality of the soul and believing everything to be matter, see the telos of human life as self-centered bodily pleasure before entering the grave. And where are the Epicureans? Where do we meet them? Their immortal souls are entombed forever in graves. What a fitting punishment. That is deliciously ironic, all things considered. Furthermore, Dante sees what kind of city an Epicurean ethos results in. The city is transformed into a bunch of atomized and isolated individual bodies, seeking their own self-pleasure, which they can never retain. And it is within the city of Dis that we meet the Epicurean city, the city that is in contrast to the city we found in Limbo. In Dis, the souls are separated from one another, entombed, unable to speak with each other. Where the other circles of hell were, in a certain way, social, the Epicureans are antisocial, precisely because their sociality was grounded in purely the self. The Epicurean city is atomized and self-centered. In denying the soul, they could never satiate their desires because they linked it to the body rather than to the intellectual soul. The result of Epicurean philosophy is a soulless city, separated and asocial. It is moments like this that make the Divine Comedy so great for those who are able to pick up on all the subtleties of the epic. Here, Dante allows Virgil to admonish him by bringing up Aristotle as the contrast to the Epicureans. Aristotle had always been foundational to Christianity. Aristotle argued that when the soul imitated nature, it was perfected. The Epicureans, in denying the soul and arguing that humans should act opposite of nature, be asocial and hedonistic, rather than social and seeking after transcendent wisdom, become a corrupt shell of humanity. The Christian who imitates nature is perfected. This is at the heart of Catholic natural theology, which Dante also studied and strongly promoted in his life. Dante joined the Franciscan order in his lifetime. Because the Epicureans denied two basic truths, the result of Epicurean philosophy, Dante warns us, is that it will lead to destruction and death, because that is what Epicurean philosophy sees as the ultimate end of the human endeavor. There is no immortality. Death and destruction is all that waits us. And thus we find the Epicureans get what they wanted: death and destruction within hell. The seventh circle is divided into three subdivisions: violence done unto others, self, and God. The journey of Dante and Virgil through the seventh circle contains some vividly bloody and memorable scenes, like when the bush of Giacomo de Sant'Andrea hid in and was torn apart by demons pursuing him, or when the poor thorn bush had a branch snapped off by Dante and started bleeding and weeping. The imagery of the seventh circle is bloody and haunting, and intends to move the reader to weep with the souls trapped in hell. Dante is trying to communicate the theological virtue of charity, of empathy and compassion, even in the Inferno. Again, this is one of those beautiful moments of literary and theological reflection and subtlety that you should pick up on. The message being communicated in the seventh circle is that the suicide of man has consequences for the rest of creation. As man leaps to his own death, he brings about the destruction of creation at the same time. Hence why most of the suicides are violent perpetrators in the seventh circle, and they take the form of a creaturely object of creation, and their misery and destruction doubles as the destruction of nature. Again, we saw Giacomo de Sant'Andrea and the branch that had its branch ripped off, bleeding and weeping. Creation itself is destroyed by man's destruction. Man is not separate from creation. Man is part of creation. The fall and violence of men will have consequences to the created world. This is, of course, premised from the Christian reading of the fall of man. Part of the fall of man in the Christian tradition is man's estrangement from creation. Hence, man takes a domineering and destructive attitude toward the natural world, which is something beautiful and, when properly understood, should direct man to God in its beauty and majesty. As Augustine said, there is nothing wrong with loving God through loving the world, if we understand that God is the creator of the world and wants us to love. Here we find nature decrepit, destroyed, and dying. St. Paul wrote in his epistle to the Romans that creation groans for its restoration when the sons of men are to be glorified, in Romans 8:19, implying that creation will become majestic and glorified through man's sanctification, because man will have a restored relationship to nature. Until that day, however, man brings about his own demise, which has the unintended consequence of destroying the natural world too. Again, hence why we see the souls here in the form of nature, of the creation, being torn apart, snapped, bloodied, and beaten. The destruction of man and the violence of man against the self is also violence done against nature and done against God, because God created you. You are made in the image of God, and God created the cosmos and the natural world, which we now also destroy because we have rejected God, who is truth. The seventh circle embodies the rejection of man being made in the image of God. Again, we see how in these circles of hell, we see a willful rejection of some sort of truth. Because we rejected man being made in the image of God, the rejection that all life, human and animal or plant, is sacred and should not be willfully destroyed writ large, and the rejection of God himself through blasphemy, the final of the three layers within the circle, we see Dante constructing a very poetic understanding of theology. In rejecting the truth that man is made in the image of God, and in rejecting God as the creator of the natural world, we destroy ourselves and we destroy nature. I should note here that Dante is also playing creative games with numerology. As we are approaching the darkest and deepest levels of hell, thus getting closer to the pure rejection of the good, the true, and the beautiful, we also see a corrupt parody of the Trinity in the seventh circle, with the three layers within this circle, which all relate to some sort of rejection of the God who is truth, who is also, according to Christianity, a triune being. The transformation of humans into plants and other natural objects of the world also reflects the fall of the soul from being a rational and intellectually seeking force, which transforms man to being like God, to a vegetable. In rejecting the truth and goodness of life, in rejecting the immortality and the rationality of the soul, man becomes a vegetable. He becomes a beast and a plant in the process. It is man who is formed in the image of God, and to be made in the image of God means to have a soul, again a rational soul, to know truth, wisdom, and love. By becoming vegetables and beasts, men reject their created state of being as an image of God and private or destroy their relationality and love to pure id and self-centeredness. The eighth circle of hell has within it the city of the Malebolge, and the Bolgias here total 10 ditches, an imperfect number that does not match up with the 9 circles of hell, because there can be no symmetry or proportion or order in hell, since hell is inverted imperfection. Within the 8 circles, we see souls who cause division, strife, discord, were interested only in themselves and didn't live to care for others, betrayed the love and trust of others because they were only interested in their self-promotion. Thus, in a careful distinction here, avoiding intentional and malevolent betrayal, which is reserved for the 9 circles. For the 9th circle, we also find in the 8th circle hypocrites, politicians, not a very good profession to be in, sorcerers, and all the other people who can broadly be characterized as frauds. It looks like politics hasn't changed much. The sin of fraudulence represents the continuation of the decline and destruction of truth. In this circle, the truth of trust of others or of false presentation, not being truthful in presenting yourself to others, is what is being rejected. But these truths are not rejected with the intent to harm others necessarily, as much as they are representative of one's own self-interest and self-want for power. Jason, the famous Greek hero, is the famous representative of this theological mythology. Jason, interested in his elevation to kingship, betrayed the love and trust of Hypsipyle. This self-centered fraud, a reflection of the incurvatus in se, the inward curve to the self, that foreshadows and prefigures the more extreme version of self-centered fraud that is contained in the 9th circle, is important to understand, thus why Dante uses the mythological hero Jason to convey his point. Jason never intentionally or malevolently sought to harm Hypsipyle, but being so self-absorbed with himself, he rejected the power of love and her trust and abandoned her. Jason was always intending to rise to the kingship, rise to become king by any means necessary. He had determined for himself this course of action before he ever met Hypsipyle. Thus, why Dante uses this example from mythology to highlight a form of non-intentional betrayal. I determined for myself, long before I ever met somebody, that the course of action I was going to take was the course of action I was going to take. Thus, it isn't surprising that a self-centered individual engages and embarks on the course of action that he or she does. Additional figures in the Eighth Circle include prominent church figures, including popes, all of whom are guilty of having betrayed the trust of their public offices for self-gain. In Catholic theology, God entrusts stewardship to the clergy. But Catholic theology also maintains that the church is a mixed body of saints and sinners, which includes the clergy. In fact, early Christian tradition asserted that hell was paved with the skulls of the clergy, meaning that most of the wicked sinners within the church were clergymen. Nonetheless, God does not abandon his church, which is the body of believers, as per Psalm 88 or Psalm 89 in the Protestant Bible. In the Eighth Circle, it is important to recall that we started with misdirected love. Now we have the rejection of love. With the rejection of love comes the loss of truth. Hell is becoming a loveless place, as Dante and Virgil proceed further through it. No more misdirected love, as was the case of the second through fifth circles of hell. Only the love of self is found now in the Eighth Circle, which leads humanity and the world on the path of destruction. Narcissus, the quintessential embodiment of self-love, is also found in the Eighth Circle. The love and want of glory for oneself also betrays humanity's social and relational, e.g. affectionate nature. Other famous circles in the Eighth Circle of Hell who betray public trust, and through their works and actions brought about strife and schism as a result of their separation, include Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest, who had Jesus brought to trial, and Muhammad. A note as to why Muhammad is in the Eighth Circle is because Catholicism has always regarded Islam as a sort of heretical form of Christianity. For those proficient in Islamic theology, Jesus is the ultimate prophet, born of the Virgin Mary, who will come again and defeat the forces of evil, preside over the final judgment, and bring the good into the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is the Messiah in Islamic theology. This, of course, sounds pretty close to Christianity, and you'd be correct. However, Islam denies that Christ is the Logos. Instead, the law, or the Sharia, is what brings about human happiness through submission to law, rather than to love and wisdom and truth, the Trinity, which Islam also denies. Because of the closeness of these two religions, early Christian contact with Islam regarded Islam as a heretical sect with teachings similar to Christianity, but as it expanded, it destroyed the old centers of Christian education and learning: Alexandria, Cairo, Carthage, and Damascus, etc., thus sowing discord within Christian lands, as Christians were also converted to Islam. Also, because Islam rejects certain tenets within Christianity, it also rejects truth, though retaining some other truths. Hence why Muslims like Saladin, Averroes, and Avicenna were in limbo. Another one of the more memorable scenes through the journey in hell is how many of the souls in the Eighth Circle have their nature changed by the snake pit. This is symbolic of fraud. Someone presents themselves in one nature, seemingly good and pure and intelligent. However, they are in fact deceitful liars. Thus the change in their appearance when bitten by snakes. Dante is laying extensive allegory on his readers, but this would have been well known to Catholic readers, who largely had been reading the Bible allegorically from the beginning and were fond and well versed in the allegorical hermeneutics of the Church Fathers and would have understood what Dante was communicating in his poem. Entering the ninth and final circle of hell, we meet Lucifer himself, who is chewing on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. The other souls in the ninth circle are also traitors. Treachery is considered the worst sin in Catholicism because it is the ultimate betrayal of basic truths that only occurs with malevolent intent on the part of the perpetrator. Whereas Jason betrayed Hypsipyle because he wanted kingship before meeting her, the traitors here deliberately and willingly engaged in intentional betrayal of their friends, family, countrymen, and benefactors through their own free will decision. Those who betray their family are guilty of rejecting filial piety, a truth known to the Greeks and Romans and commended by Catholic teaching. This is also contained in the Ten Commandments. Honor your father and mother. The betrayal of earthly parents is also symbolic of humanity's betrayal of their heavenly parents. Those who betray their country are guilty of also betraying their parents. Why? In classical political thought, and this would have been known to readers of Cicero, your country is like your parent. Patri, or fatherland, is like your mother or father who nurtured you and raised you, feeding and sustaining you, clothing you, and giving you a place to work, call home, and rest. And how did you repay this self-giving love of country? By stabbing it in the back. The soldier who opened the gates of Troy to the Greeks is found here for his sin of treason. Catholic doctrine promotes patriotism as an extension of the fourth commandment, to love and honor your parents. Thus, the betrayal of country is not only something consciously conceived and acted upon by people, it represents the further rejection of the importance of family and the love that family ought to show. That is, the love of one's country, which grows from having loved one's parents. Betrayal of earthly allegiance is also seen as a betrayal of eternal allegiance, for one's eternal country is heaven, but one's earthly country is the country he or she finds himself a citizen and subject of, and of course still subject to the will of God. Catholicism never sought to expunge the love of one's country. In fact, it wanted people to be more loyal to their countries, because loyalty to country is loyalty to family. It builds attachment. Attachment leads to proper loving, and proper loving is the pathway to heaven. Betrayal of earthly parents, literal human parents, as your country is a parent, is what inevitably leads to the rejection of God as your eternal and transcendent parent. The argument is simple. Family is at the center of all life and flourishing. God, in the scriptures, is a father figure who is gathering his children to himself in a great family banquet. In rejecting parents, you are rejecting one of the sacraments by which God's love, truth, and grace is manifested in the world, the family. It is also the worst rejection of love possible. The rejection of love of family is the worst rejection of love in human life. As St. Paul wrote to Timothy for his instruction of others, those who do not look after their family members in their time of need are, quote, worse than the infidels. Finally, as Dante and Virgil travel through the ninth circle, we reach the frozen lake, where Lucifer is a corrupt parody of the Trinity with his three heads, each representing a different member of the Trinity, and the colors of ignorance, black, impotence, yellow, and hatred, red, and inversion of the symbolism of those colors within the Trinity. Hatred, of course, is the one we should note here. Hatred is symbolized by the color red, which in Christian theology is the color to symbolize love. Ignorance, of course, is the opposite of wisdom. Impotence, the opposite of omnipotence. And as mentioned, hatred, the opposite of love. And each corresponds with one of the persons of the Trinity. Wisdom, who is Christ, omnipotence, a trait of the Father, and love, the gift of the Holy Spirit. Judas, Brutus, and Cassius are the three souls being chewed on by Lucifer because, for Dante and Latin Christianity, having sprung from Roman culture and history, these three souls represented the worst of traitors. They betrayed their benefactor and God, who is the benefactor of all. Judas betrayed his benefactor, teacher, and God, Jesus of Nazareth. Brutus and Cassius betrayed their benefactor, friend, and earthly father, Julius Caesar. They all consciously chose to do so. In rejecting family, country, and benefactor, God, the ninth circle represents the total and complete collapse of truth, as everyone is turned inward only to themselves, to the point of deliberately and intentionally betraying others. As such, there is no love to be shown in this circle of hell. Love of family is non-existent. Love of country is non-existent. Love of others is non-existent. Love of friends is non-existent. Love of God is non-existent. Meaning the love for wisdom is non-existent, as the furthest depth of hell is frozen and dark. There is no light, knowledge, or warmth, love, in the ninth circle. It is a cold, dark, and sterile place. Only ignorance and death reign in hell. Beside Lucifer chewing on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius, another aspect of the ninth circle is how alone it is. Everyone is frozen in place. Lucifer weeps. All beauty, goodness, and truth that any of these souls might have had at one point in their life is gone. They are sad parodies of their once noble and beautiful selves. We must recall that Lucifer, before his fall, was the most beautiful and powerful of the angels. Brutus and Cassius, before their betrayal of Julius Caesar, were beautiful, honorable, and noble Romans. And yes, even Judas was one of the apostles. This is what the rejection of love and truth exhausts itself into, according to Christianity. You die alone. So as Dante and Virgil slipped down the body of Satan to enter on the other side of the world, because the medievals knew the world was round, contrary to popular misconception, since the Greeks had learned the world was round in the 4th century BC, Dante concludes the Inferno by saying, "We climbed, he first and I behind, until through a small round opening ahead of us, I saw the lovely things the heavens hold, and we came out to see once more the stars." That Dante ends the journey through hell with a return to the light, the stars, which is wisdom, and directs our souls, the rational faculties, up to transcendence, the heavens. We leave behind the world of the cold, dark, and dead, and re-enter the world of light, warmth, love, and knowledge. The stars represent love and knowledge, the two things needed to understand the order of the world, of life, and how to live. Dante, for the record, poetically ends each of the 3 books, with seeing the stars above, an important symbolic image that humans, head erect, are meant to gaze at the wonder of the cosmos, and through the sacramental reality of the cosmos, be awed by its beauty and love, which point the soul back to God. Hell is understood by Dante as an inverted hierarchy, as we descend lower and lower through the 9 circles of hell. A parody of the true hierarchy of truth and nature, mind you. It is not to be understood literally that there are 9 circles of hell. This is allegory. The message that Dante is communicating is that the greater severity of sin, the greater severity of misdirected love, or the greater severity of rejecting truth, God itself, will transform souls differently, and their corresponding transformation and quote-unquote punishment reflects this. For instance, the sin of lust is not as bad as the sin of fratricide. Hell is a place that corresponds with wrongly directed love and the rejection of truth. Not every sin is the same, and therefore not everyone is the same. This is basic Catholic anthropological teaching. Everyone is unique, and all sin is unique. As such, each soul receives a unique transformation in what they loved in life, which corresponds with their placement in heaven or hell. You become what you love. And we should also note here that this is precisely what we found in the journey through hell. In all the various souls that Dante meets in his journey, we see them as sinners guilty of having loved something improperly or having rejected a truth which has caused their damnation. At the end of hell, we see the ultimate destruction, the ultimate manifestation of what misdirected love and the rejection of truth leads to. A cold, loveless death, alone, without beauty. And where and what does Dante see as he leaves hell to begin his ascent up Mount Purgatory to enter heaven? The beauty and warmth of the stars, and he is with another human being.